Okay, I suppose, Taoiseach, I think you will accept that there's widespread public concern out there around crime in urban areas, crime in rural areas. In fact, over the last 12 months, we've probably heard more about rural crime than we've ever heard before, though I think an analysis of the figures show that crime is a problem in our urban areas as well. It is good to hear that you propose to convene a meeting of the Justice Subcommittee to look at the Garda Inspector's report, because it throws up hugely significant issues. Issues, I think, that go to the heart of the policing system that we have had for decades in this country. Issues that are, I suppose, implicitly critical of the current and of previous Ministers for Justice, including Ministers for Justice from my own party, insofar as they have presided over, if you like, a bureaucratisation of the policing service. And there's an extent to which the public, Taoiseach, are way ahead of us politicians in terms of how they view the policing service that they have. If you talk to people, whether it's in Mayo or Kildare or in Dublin, they'll tell you that what they want from their Gardaí is they want high visibility in their areas, on their streets, in their estates, on their country roads. They want to know that if there's an incident in their home or at their business, if they lift the phone, that there will be some sort of expeditious response from the Gardaí to that situation. But the reality is that we have allowed the system to develop to such an extent that so many of our Gardaí are tied down by office duties and by bureaucracy and by attending court and a multiplicity of other duties, many of which I think it can fairly be said might be taken on by civilian employees, thereby allowing the Gardaí to go back on the beat, to be back in communities and to be visible in a way that they have not been in recent years. So when the Garda Inspector's report says to us that they estimate 1,500 Gardaí, I think, could be freed up for this type of duty, and that 250 could be identified straight away, they're making a point that I think many people throughout the country would concur with. So can I ask you, do you envisage the committee, this Cabinet Subcommittee on Justice, addressing this particular issue and being in a position to do something about it? Equally so, the report from the prison service that has been brought forward in recent days, which talks about recidivism and which highlights the recurring problem, particularly with young male offenders who return again and again to a life of crime, people who are not gaining anything, it can be clearly seen from their incarceration within the prison service, albeit that there is a training and education service available within our prisons. But one cannot but raise the point that we have a prison system and a prison service that is particularly expensive. I think it costs something of the order of 70,000 per annum to incarcerate a prisoner. Many of these, not all obviously, but many of these ongoing problems, people who have become involved in a life of crime, many of these people can be identified at a very early stage in life. In fact, people in the education system will tell you that they can identify children from a very early age as being children who are at risk. Yet we have not been investing as a state in the way that we should. We haven't had the sort of early intervention. The home school liaison programme, the school completion programme, and even guidance counselling has all been negatively impacted by cuts by this government, indeed by my own government, my own party in government previously. But obviously, I think
a little bit now.
well, we're talking about crime. We're talking about crime.
About the cabinet.
Well, all right. Right, Count Cord, I'll come back. We've seen the closure of 139 Garda stations. You told us, Taoiseach, that that would allow greater flexibility to the police force. We'd see them, they'd be far more active, they'd be more high profile. The reality is that hasn't happened. And indeed, one wonders what has happened with those 139 Garda stations. Those buildings were all of some importance in their local communities. In Kildare we saw 3 Garda stations, for example, closed, and I heard a debate on local radio this morning about one of them in the village Ballitore, where the community are saying, please can we have the Garda station to be used as a community facility. Are these the type of issues that can be discussed by your Cabinet Committee? Can you see the government giving an instruction to the Garda authorities or to the OPW or whoever is ultimately responsible to, at this time of housing crisis, to bring these buildings into use either as housing accommodation or in some by way of some sort of community facility? Finally, can I refer just to the drugs problem? Do you accept that the current situation is in fact a crisis situation with relation to drugs, both in rural and urban areas? When we talk about drugs, we talk very often about the cities and about the large towns, and we know that they're problematic there. But I think you know yourself, Taoiseach, that the drugs problem is afflicting every town and village in rural Ireland today. I recently visited a small estate in my constituency of about 40 houses, wherein there are 3 heroin addicts living, with all the ensuing antisocial behaviour that arises out of people trekking in and out of the estate, selling these drugs and trying to recruit others into the same addictive habit. So there are a whole host of issues there on the justice agenda. Can you give us some indication that in the period ahead they're going to be tackled by the government? And could we see perhaps the Justice Subcommittee meeting on an even more regular basis, so that these particularly the report from the Garda Inspectorate and the report on the prison service, that they could be more actively pursued?
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Well, obviously crime is an issue for everybody, and it's always of concern. I agree that it's important to have visibility in the areas for members of the Gardaí. That's why, given the constraints that were on the economy for the last number of years, things have now begun to move in a much more positive direction. The Garda College is open in Templemore, 600 recruits to go through next year, come from a variety of different backgrounds. Some of them who have been in different jobs for quite a number of years, maybe married people with families, very different kind of Garda recruit now at Cancora than used to be strictly with a younger age cohort, and it gives a greater mix, I think, of people wishing to serve in the Garda Síochána. Clearly, Gardaí on the beat are an issue. People love to see the Gardaí in the community, either on the bikes or walking around the estates or whatever else, and this is part and parcel of good connection with the community. Why would the situation be that you train Gardaí and you remunerate them to do their job, and that they walk through a community without knowing who the people are? Obviously, that kind of connection, that kind of information is really important for Gardaí, and I'm very glad to see that's happening in a whole range of areas around the country now. I know of one location where the Gardaí will drive the car to point X and they walk within a couple of miles of that, and they call to all the houses, identify themselves, and get information as to the family members and all of that. The inspectorate report, I'll come to that in a minute. As you know, we set about putting in place an independent policing authority, which is the single greatest shake-up in the Gardaí since the foundation of the state. And that provides Deputy Fearghaíl for the appointment of the new policing authority to oversee the police functions of An Taoiseach. The legislation is now dealt with. The consultations that took place were very extensive. They are generally in line with the scheme of the bill that was published back in November 2014. The Joint Committee considered the scheme. They did it with pre-legislative scrutiny. They broadly welcomed its proposals. As I say, pending its legal establishment, which the government signed off on today, Ms Josephine Fearghaíl, former chair of the Revenue Commissioners, has been nominated as the chairperson of the authority. The Minister for Justice is making arrangements for the 8 ordinary members of the authority to be appointed, designated on an interim basis also. These posts were advertised through the Public Appointments Commission. 97 applications were received for the 8 positions, and follow an individual exercise in interviewing all of them, PASS put forward 17 applicants for consideration. The Public Appointments Commission has also run an open competition to fill the positions of Chief Executive and Head of Legal and Governance for the authority, and those appointments will be announced shortly at Count Corleb. So I think that takes effect, Deputy Fearghaíl, on the 1st of January. 1st of January next. I might say to you that you mentioned about the Garda Inspector's report. This is to be considered by the committee very shortly. And at that meeting, I would expect to have both the Garda Commissioner and the head of the Governance Authority, Mr. Olsen. And there are issues in that report that do need to be teased out, that do need to be talked about openly and frankly, and in respect of which you'd hope that we could get clarity and agreement about the structure and the strategy. Now, I would say, when I read the report that says there's a lack of confidence and trust in civilians, people working in the justice system. Now, is this true or is it not true? From my experience of local Garda stations in different places around the country, that is not the case. They work very well. They work well with the inspectors, the superintendents, the chief superintendents, as the case might be. And civilians who are properly trained do free up Garda personnel who are also trained to do a different job. I think that's an issue, and you've raised that point. But also, I think the question of the amalgamation of districts, how does that work? Is there a system within the Gardaí that accepts that from the Commissioner right down, that there's an openness and a willingness to engage in the interests of the community and the job that the Gardaí have to do, which, as we all know, can be both fatal and very difficult in many circumstances. So that's partly, I think, where the committee would like to engage with Mr. Olsen and with the Garda Commissioner to follow through on these issues. Now, you also mentioned the question of Garda station closures. Yesterday, actually, I attended at a meeting with the Chief Superintendent for the Western Region, comprising Galway, Mayo, Roscommon, Longford, Westmeath, with all of the Chief Gardaí personnel and the Minister for Justice, in a very open and frank discussion. And for instance, in the case of where rural Garda stations were closed, many of these buildings were 100 years or more, weren't even acceptable to the local community. The important point, Deputy Fearghaíl, is that the Garda was not lost to the community. Because while the station might close, the Garda was still in situ in that community. And rather than sitting for 2 hours on a Tuesday or a Friday waiting for unemployment assistance forms to be signed, the Garda actually has the capacity to move out through the community to call on older people, say, here's my card, and so on. And on top of that, the Gardaí themselves made the point that the superintendent was the real powerhouse in the system here, together with the inspectors and the sergeants. They go around to the community councils on a regular basis and talk to them and say, what is the issue? And for instance, well, it's just a point of fact that the incidence of burglaries and crime in the West has fallen. Not because of that fact, but I think because of greater evidence and visibility in the community. I think it's also a fact that government, with meagre resources, now getting a little stronger, we're able to provide for vehicles, for proper equipment for the Gardaí, put 200 million on the table for proper IT, so that the Tetra system works everywhere, so that the new communication systems will allow Gardaí to be very available to have that first-hand information from communities. And I attended at a sort of security presentation by the Gardaí recently, those who supply different kinds of equipment for houses. And one of the issues is that a well-concentrated, well-resourced community text alert scheme is very important, as you know, in any community. Vehicle X or Vehicle Y or Person X, Person Y, these things can be communicated and responded to very quickly by a community which is quite alert and vigilant. So at least from what I heard yesterday from the chief superintendents, the superintendents and the inspectors, the engagement of the Gardaí with their communities is very much upfront and very engaging, and that's to be commended. So that's another area that I think we'd like to talk to the Garda Inspectorate about, in the context of putting a structure together that's fit for 21st century and for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I say to the members of the Gardaí, it's not just looking at the next 2 years or 5 years. What kind of a Garda force do we want in 10 years and in 20 years that's capable of meeting the new demands in terms of criminality, drugs and burglaries and so on? You also mentioned about the burglaries, and I have to tell you that Operation Thor, which has been introduced and provided for, has been of great benefit to the Gardaí. They've actually been calling to the houses of criminals who were convicted and released on bail. And if they're not available or they're not adhering to the conditions of bail, well then they're in difficulty. Obviously, it's a multi-strand national anti-crime campaign now being conducted by the Gardaí. It's been in planning for several months. It was launched both as a follow-on to recent announcements regarding investment in policing and to coincide with the advent of long winter nights, which are always a cause of concern to people. And that contains a range of activities to deal with burglars, organised crime gangs and prolific offenders. I heard of one offender who had been a drug addict, committed 5 or 6 burglaries and was put away because of the capacity of Operation Thor to apprehend him. And that these measures included Concorla high visibility patrols in identified burglary hotspots. It's not true to say that all the burglaries, come from one area in the country. There are, if you like, homegrown individuals who get involved in burglaries in their own regions, and it's important that the information and the communities be well aware of this, that they can transmit that information quickly to Gardaí. Obviously, you've had high-powered vehicles being provided for the Gardaí, new regional response units. I was very glad at Concorda to hear the Chief Superintendent talk about the exceptional driving courses that Gardaí now go through. So they're at a standard that is much higher than the normal driver, because they may be involved in issues that have to deal with that. Efforts to disrupt stolen goods, programs to help reduce reoffending by prolific offenders, a high-powered national crime awareness campaign which is now underway. All of these things are important. There's 34 million gone into Garda vehicles since 2012, 640 new vans, cars and jeeps become available this year, including some high-powered vehicles for armed Garda units. That's also an important investment in airborne surveillance in the capital programme for 2016 to 2021. So they're getting equipped with the very best level of technology and information systems. And obviously 205 million to be spent over the lifetime of the plan. So I think that gives the Gardaí a better capacity to respond to this kind of activity. Obviously, we're concerned about it as our communities. There's been an ending of the moratorium on the recruitment of Gardaí. 550 already taken in, and a further 600 commencing training next year. And they're all young people. Obviously, the Gardaí work well now with the Irish Farmers Association, Winch and Tira, the other community organisations, including the alert programmes, the ongoing work of the Metal Theft Forum, the Crime Stoppers campaign, highlighting the theft of livestock and animals, the new Theft Stop initiative in relation to farm equipment, and of course the very highly successful Garda text alert schemes. These are some of the things, Deputy Fearghaíl, that are out there at the moment.
Deputy Adams.